Good morning and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Dave Deacon, and we're coming to you from the Southwest Research and Extension Center near Altus, where the cotton crop is right on schedule, and we'll have more on that a little bit later in the show. But first, here's a summer crop update with Dr. Josh Lofton.
We're at a kind of a mixed bag with the summer crops right now. In certain areas that have been a little kinder, that have gotten the timely rains, that things have kind of come together. Summer crops look great because we have this nice heat. It's been kind of humid. It's not a really dry, hot, it's a nice humid heat, which these summer crops love if you have the moisture. Some of our areas, a bulk majority of a lot of our milo producing areas and some of our soybean producing areas, unfortunately just haven't caught the rains. It's literally been, are you a mile here, are you a mile there, as to say, you know, how good the summer crops look this year. And a lot of the issues we're struggling with right now are because of what the foundation that was laid in April. You know, anything that was in that April-May time period that we planted, more than likely those are the kind of summer crops that are struggling right now because they have very shallow root systems. That very shallow root system is okay if it keeps raining. However, it's that very shallow rooting system that's getting us with a double edge. So anything that was planted from our milo to our soybeans that was held through those rainy periods in April and May, they're probably struggling if they haven't hit those rainfall. The later planting that didn't struggle through that really rainy period seems to be progressing a lot better than some of our crops that kind of sat through that and had to deal with that because of that shallow rooting system that they have. The fortunate thing for us is the yields look to be there. The unfortunate thing is the price doesn't seem to be matching those yields. So we look to be pretty good agronomically from a farm production standpoint. It might be a little cross because of the price. For some of our milo and some of those other things, typically planted a little farther west, which has gone through that more prolonged drought period. And I know we look at the drought monitor index and the Mesonet. Sometimes that just doesn't tell the story of how droughty some of these crops are. We just need a little bit more rain and we need these 100-degree days to start trailing off on ourselves. So this was a year because we were so wet and we were so cool coming out of our winter crops and into our summer crops. We said chinch bugs might not be an issue this year, and we're starting to get chinch bugs in really massively. So look for a lot of lodging, a lot of sorghum on the ground because the chinch bugs, what they do is they go in and weaken that stalk, and then with any sort of wind or any sort of poor conditions, like a good rainstorm comes through, it'll push everything on the ground. We're starting to see charcoal rot come in really heavily this year, and we're starting to see soybeans come with the same thing. And so growers can be able to see a lot of that from the road. They'll be able to see things maturing and drying down probably 2 to 3 weeks faster than you would expect that to be. If they get a black, almost weathered appearance to that inner stem, that's charcoal rot. That just means that we need to address those fields sooner with the combine because there's still some good grain to that. Does not affect grain yield typically to a degree some other diseases will. It just makes it to where it won't stand on itself. And so we need to get the combines through those fields very quickly if we want to recover anything.
And Seth, that's most of the summer crops. Cotton, on the other hand, it's been a good year for cotton.
Yeah, it's particularly irrigated cotton. So we had a pretty wet start to the year, which was the opposite of what we saw last year. So most cotton got off to a fairly good start. And then in July, you know, we really started to feel that normal summer heat and even some sort of abnormal summer heat. So for the irrigated crop, if you have enough water to keep up with it, that was really good conditions. So we had the heat units to kind of make up for some of the ground that we talked about we lost early. And so we've actually had a pretty good fruit load develop and very little fruit shed, which is kind of a sign of stress in the plant. Dry land, on the other hand, has definitely been through a little bit of stress, particularly heat stress with the recent temperatures and low rainfall. So we have seen some of the dry land crops sort of start to bloom out the top, and in cotton that kind of means you're done blooming. A little bit premature for dry land. That's mostly the earlier planted crop. Later planted started to see a little bit of fruit abortion, but with the recent rains we've had, we've sort of staved some of that off. So hopefully we'll retain more of that fruit than we were thinking we would with the recent rain.
How are we with the insects? That's always a a touchy subject as we move further into the summer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we never get comfortable.
Right.
I'll say we've had maybe some minor hot spots of certain things flare up. We've started seeing some areas of stink bug pressure, and those will feed on your young bulbs, your young fruit. And the problem with stink bugs is the way they feed, they leave a wound in the fruit, and so that can be a way for disease to get into the plant.
Years past, we've always had problems with heat units. This year, it sounds like we're right on target with it.
Yeah,
we're close to it.
Yeah, we're close. We're still a
Yeah.
little, and we talked, I guess, in May about, we were a little behind. So we've made up some ground. I always caution about when we look at heat units, if we don't have a max cutoff, if we're given 105 degree a day, 105 degree credit, we're going to make up some heat units, but none of our crops, especially cotton, really like to be 105.
Right.
So if we're in the mid to high 90s, great, and there's no water stress. If we're 105, especially prolonged, high temperatures in that range, it probably is not getting us the benefit that the heat unit calculation is going to show that we're getting.
Right.
So we probably made up some ground on the heat units. We probably had a little bit more heat stress though as well. So it's sort of a balancing act.
As we move through closer to harvest, what should producers be thinking about as far as terminating the crop later on?
Yeah, so I think early on we really were worried we were going to have a pretty immature crop going into September, and we still may in some places that had to replant late. But I think the main thing to be is to be timely with our applications. We always talk about those benchmarks we want to see before we make a harvest date application. Whether it's 4 nodes of uppermost crack bowl or 60% open. So those are there for a reason.
Right.
We tend to maybe like to push it a little bit, but getting out our products at that growth stage not only is going to give us a more timely ability to get in the field for harvest, it's also going to take advantage of the warmer weather we have earlier in the fall, and all of our harvest date products work better under warmer conditions. So just being timely is the main thing.
What do you say to those producers that their cotton was stuck in the field last year after all that rain, that they didn't take advantage of the opportunities to maybe get out and do a little bit of an earlier harvest to get the cotton out, but got rained in?
Yeah, last year was tough because of the rain. You really didn't want to pull the trigger too early because you were hoping to kind of still make some of that crop up in the late fall, and we just never caught a break. And so, hopefully we don't run into that situation again this year. It's kind of tough to tell, but we never want to get too ahead of ourselves on harvest days. We want to be able to kind of keep ourselves in line with our harvest equipment, whether we're picking or stripping. We don't want to get too far ahead of that because we can set ourselves up for some fiber quality losses and perhaps some regrowth if we go too far out ahead of our harvesting with our harvest dates. But at the same time, I still think, keeping in mind, understanding the crop growth stage, understanding what, we actually can realistically harvest on the plant, and not trying to wait for every single bowl in the plant to open is probably the best strategy.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Seth Byrd, Extension Cotton Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Wes Lee here with your weekly Mesonet weather report. This week was another unseasonably hot week for Oklahoma. It's time for things to change as fall is less than a month away. After a relatively mild start to the summer, things have really heated up lately. Around the start of August, temperatures should have started to drop off a little each week based on the Mesonet long-term averages as shown by the blue fill line. Unfortunately, no one told Mother Nature, and we have been experiencing some of the hottest weather of the year as indicated by the red line showing the smooth statewide high temperatures. This next map shows the number of days that each Mesonet site has reached 100 degrees this summer through August 20th. Hollis is still leading the race with 25 days. If we compare that to the Oklahoma climate data, we see that actually we're about right on schedule with the expected number of days above 100 for the state. When will this heat wave end? If the National Weather Service forecast is correct, the answer to that should be next week. Here we see expectations for normal to cooler than normal for the week of August 26. One model even has us only reaching into the 70s for afternoon highs on August 29th. I, for one, hope they're right. Gary's up next with more drought expansion news.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, Wes covered the temperature aspect of this flash drought situation. Now I'm going to cover the precipitation. But first, let's take a look at the latest drought monitor map, see if we have good news or bad news. Well, you could probably guess it was going to be bad news. Now we have that severe drought area across southwestern Oklahoma expanding farther to the north and also up into the central part of the state, and the surrounding area of moderate drought also expanded farther up into the northwest and into central Oklahoma. And if that wasn't enough, we now have a moderate drought area down across far southeast Oklahoma where rainfall deficits continue to grow just as in the southwest. And we also have a surrounding area of abnormally dry conditions in that area as well. That would signify areas that could go into drought very soon if they don't get significant rainfall in the next few weeks. Now let's cover the rainfall. I'm going to look at the summer thus far, and we show more than 20 inches of rainfall in the northeast to less than 3 inches in the southwest. So a great disparity in rainfall as we go from the southwest to the northeast up that I-44 corridor. We can see the departure from normal for the same time frame from the Oklahoma Mesonet. We see from 10 inches above normal in the northeast where those floods have occurred even into June. And then we have nearly 6 inches below normal in the southwest and varying amounts between. But across western Oklahoma, again, we see those deficits, and that is, again, where the drought situation is in full bloom. We can see that again in the Mesonet percentage of normal rainfall map for that same time frame. We have about twice the normal amount of rainfall from June 1st through August 20th in the northeast to about 1/3 of normal in the southwest. So again, a great disparity of rainfall and also a great disparity in drought fortunes. So again, we had mostly bad news this week, and I'm afraid it's going to stay that way unless we get significant rainfall, especially across the western portion of the state and also in the southeast. But, you know, the other parts of the state aren't out of the woods yet. We definitely need accumulating rainfall across nearly all of the state to get this drought situation nipped in the bud. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Well, it's hard to believe we're already at that time of year where we need to start thinking about planting dates for wheat. But Bob, those planting dates can kind of differ depending on what type of production systems you're going to use.
Definitely, producers that are interested in having forage for their cattle, they're going to have a much earlier planting date than those that are interested in just growing the wheat for grain only, which they'll have a much later planting date.
And so those planting dates also affect, different wheat diseases and insects that can be in the fields as well, right?
Yes, that much earlier planting date that people would want to use for getting forage, that allows much more time in the fall for different diseases and insect pests to get started.
So what type of diseases specifically are we looking at for forage production?
There's a number of them. That earlier planting date, the disease that most has to be watched would be the viruses transmitted by wheat curl mite, particularly wheat streak mosaic virus. Some of the other ones would be root rots because they have a much longer time in the fall than to be active and infect the plants. Aphid infestations, again with the early planting date, are much more likely to occur, and then the aphids will quite often transmit barley yellow dwarf virus, and so that disease can also be involved with it.
We're standing in a wheat field right now that was harvested back in early July, but there's some volunteer wheat right here, and that can actually play a role in spreading disease, correct?
Yeah, and that's especially true with the mite-transmitted viruses, particularly wheat streak mosaic virus, because this green bridge, it's referred to, helps the mites and the virus stay in the field over the summer. And if you have a field, as shown by this one here, that you end up planting commercial wheat into, chances are you have viruses like wheat streak mosaic virus in those plants, and then you have the mites there also, and those mites will then transfer to the commercial wheat, and you'll get infections in the fall, and that's the kind of years when we see a lot of that wheat streak mosaic virus in the next spring.
So what are some things that are methods of control that producers can start to think about when they're thinking about planting dates?
Well, part of it is planting date. If you are going for grain only, plant later. If you do need to plant early to get that forage, you have to make sure that this green bridge is destroyed. You're going to have maybe some volunteer weed and grassy weeds around the field that are going to be hard to control. But the virus moving in and the mites moving in from the edge of the field is not going to be nearly as devastating as if you've got that green bridge in the field. And you want to make sure when you destroy that green bridge, and you can destroy it either by cultivating, but of course you're not going to do that in a no-till system, or you can do it by spraying with Roundup, something that will kill that. But you want to make sure that green bridge is completely dead for at least 2 weeks before you plant your wheat in the fall, because the curl mites only have a lifespan of about 2 weeks, and so they'll be completely dead then. If you go ahead and spray and then plant the next day, they'll probably survive until your wheat comes up, and you won't think that the control had worked at all.
All right, thanks, Bob. If you would like some more information on planting dates, insect control, and wheat disease, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
Last week on the CowCalf Corner, we visited with you a little bit about putting together a calving kit to get ready for the upcoming calving season, and part of that calving kit was a protocol. In other words, having a written down plan as to what you're going to do when you see a cow or a heifer that needs some assistance at calving time. One of the key elements of that protocol to me is knowing when to intervene. How long do we watch this cow or heifer go through the throes of labor before we actually bring her in and check to see if there's something going wrong that we need to provide some help? USDA folks up in Miles City, Montana, a number of years ago, looked at both mature cows and first calf heifers as to the length of time it took between when they first started to calve, and by that I mean they saw the appearance of a water bag or the appearance of baby calf feet at the reproductive tract of the cow, and then timed how long it took for her to actually deliver the calf completely out on the ground. In the case of mature cows, as you can see from this particular graphic, the average length of time was only 22.5 minutes. For first calf heifers, in the Miles City study, it was about 54.5 minutes. Here at Oklahoma State University, we also did a similar study and looked at that length of time from the beginning of what we call stage 2 of calving. In other words, the first appearance of a water bag until the calf is completely delivered. And in that situation, for first calf heifers, very, very similar, 55 minutes. So I think we can round those two time frames up to the next half hour and have a good rule of thumb as to how long we're going to watch. Remember that if you do the examination and you find something you can't handle, call your local veterinarian as soon as possible. Time is of the essence. If we allow these cattle to go into labor for a long, extended period of time, they may eventually have the calf on their own, but you'll have a weakened calf that's more likely to be disease prone early in life, and that cow will be slower to come back into heat cycles for the next breeding season, and therefore be less likely to have a calf. She may be open, or if she has a calf the following year, it'll be much later. So keep that in mind as you go through this or any calving season. Let's use our rule of thumb of a half an hour for that mature cow, 1 hour for the first calf heifer. Then we can bring her up and decide if we need to provide assistance or call for help. I hope this helps you as you go through this calving season, and we sure look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's CowCalf Corner.
Well, it's been another tough week for corn and wheat prices. They're down 10 cents, but before we get into that, we had a viewer question come in, and Kim, the viewer wanted to know why the spread of soft red winter wheat is so wide relative to hard red winter wheat.
Well, you normally have a spread plus or minus 20 cents. Most of the time, hard red winter wheat is a premium to soft wheat. Right now, soft red winter wheat is a premium to hard wheat. If you look at that September contract, you've got a 70-cent spread. That's well above that normal 20. In the D's contract, it's 68 cents. If you look at that stocks to use ratio, that's how much we use divided by the ending stocks. In hard red winter wheat, it's projected to be 50%. In other words, at the end of this marketing year, we're going to have 50% of the wheat we need for next year's use. Soft red winter wheat's only 39%, so soft red winter wheat supply and demand much better position than hard wheat. If you look at production, over the last, say, 10 years, hard red winter wheat production's averaged 850 million bushels. We're producing 840 this year. Soft red winter wheat, 340 million bushels, average 257 this week. You've seen adjustments in the soft wheat in their production. You look at planted acres, hard red winter wheat over the last 4 or 5 years is 25% below where it was 5 years ago. Soft red winter wheat's 34%. One last thing, protein. Hard red winter wheat protein this year is well below average, 11.3, 11.2%, somewhere in that range. Soft red winter wheat is well above average. So soft red winter wheat, tighter supply and demand, better quality.
So are there any things that the hard red winter wheat producers can learn from the soft red winter wheat producers?
I think both are reacting to the market. The soft wheat, I believe they've got more alternatives for what they can use that land for than the hard red winter wheat producers. But you're seeing the hard red take marginal acres out of production, reduce the acres planted. So both are adjusting to what the market's telling them.
So let's move back, back to grain prices. They continue to slide. Is there anything that can stop this bleeding with them?
Well, I think wheat is following corn down, especially the hard red winter wheat. There's a lot of going on relative to is the USDA estimate correct or is the market estimate correct? And I think the market is probably on the bottom, pretty close to wallowing around now. But that next, the September WASDE is going to have a big impact on these prices. I think we're near the bottom, but we're just going to have to wait and see.
So there were some crop tours going on much of around in the corn area. So what were the estimates with that, and what is going to be the impact of it?
Well, the estimates are all below USDA's number, which is what you would expect given what the market chatter is. However, if you look at what prices are doing and what the buyers and sellers are believing, they're buying and selling based on USDA's number, which is significantly higher production in the corn market than the market analysts have it. So right now, USDA estimates rule.
All right, thanks, Kim. Kim Anderson, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Record rainfall back in the spring and summer led to flooding across much of the state. And while most of the focus was on life and livestock, wildlife was impacted too. Curtis Hare shows us how wetlands have helped heal the ecosystems of Oklahoma.
Wetlands are really important and they can add a lot to your land by having them on your land. And a great example of this is floodplain wetlands. As we've went and channelized a lot of our rivers and streams, we have lost that buffering of those floodplain wetlands. And so they actually slow the release of water downstream and capture a lot of that flood water so that we don't have these devastating floods in a lot of our towns and cities along these rivers. And so wetlands play a very important role in terms of buffering and mitigating flood damage.
The U.S. has lost about 50% of wetlands due to draining and damming up the rivers. In Oklahoma, 70% have disappeared.
The attitude for many, many years has been that wetlands are these mosquito-ridden swamplands that have no value at all. But in reality, wetlands have tremendous value.
Wildlife also benefits from wetlands. Extension wildlife specialist Dwayne Elmore says this ecosystem is essential for many Oklahoma species.
So there's a lot of species of wildlife that use wetlands and some species of wildlife that require wetlands. One that comes to mind obviously are amphibians, frogs and salamanders, also aquatic turtles. All of these species need wetlands for at least a portion of their life cycle, but also lots of birds nest in and around wetlands, things like red-winged blackbirds, lots of waterfowl. There are some species that need deep water wetlands and wetlands that might be flooded for a longer portion in the year. But other species require wetlands that might only have water on them for a few weeks. So if you value wildlife on your property or just in the state, these wetlands are critically important.
It's not just Oklahoma wildlife that relies on the state's wetlands. Every year, thousands of shorebirds make a pit stop on their migration north.
So Oklahoma, being kind of centrally located in the continent, we're right in the middle of a major flyway for a lot of migratory birds that pass through the state going up into the northern Great Plains. A lot of these species end up all the way to the boreal of Canada, and the wetlands that Oklahoma has are critical for these species to be able to recharge before they go nest to the north and ultimately produce young that will come back through the state in the fall. There are a lot of species that have been negatively impacted by the drainage and alteration of wetlands. And it's hard to imagine now, but a few decades ago, wood duck were in really serious trouble because of loss of wetlands, and particularly loss of forested wetlands. As areas have been reforested and we've put in nesting boxes for wood ducks, their numbers have really recovered. So that's a success story for our part of the world of a bird that was almost lost.
Mitigating flooding and providing habitat to wildlife are just some of the benefits that wetlands provide. This ecosystem also plays a huge role in groundwater recharge.
If you as a landowner are concerned about losing groundwater, wetlands act as that conduit that allows water to actually recharge groundwater. They are important in terms of nutrient cycling. When we think about, if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, there's a huge dead zone that is a major reason for that is with all of the pollutants that come down the Mississippi River. Well, wetlands, they can filter a lot of these pollutants, a lot of the nitrates that come in the system, phosphate that comes in the system, and so they basically clean the water. And so you think of them as basically nature's kidneys is what they're often referred to.
For more information on wetlands and wetland restoration programs, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu. I'm Curtis Hare.
Well, that does it for us this week on SUNUP. If there's something on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu. And while you're there, check out our social media. From the Southwest Research and Extension Center near Altus, I'm Dave Deacon, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.